Hello and welcome. During this video, we are going to walk through the first step in the mobile intake process, which is creating a form request. And we will also walk through the second step of how the client receives and completes the form request. Before we get started, I want to point out that I'm assuming you've already watched the mobile intake overview video. And I'm assuming that you've already set up your mobile intake forms and your mobile consent forms. If you haven't done that, you can find those videos in the Video Training Center under the Help tab in CenterPiece. Okay, so assuming that that's been done, let's go back to our mobile intake process flow chart. In the last two videos, we completed the setup of our mobile intake forms and our mobile consent forms. Now that those are complete, we are now ready to walk through the first step of creating the form request. Remember that a form request is like a digital clipboard that has one or more digital intake and/or consent forms for your client to complete. Once the form request is created, the next step is for your client to receive and complete the digital forms in one of three ways. One, they can be completed prior to their visit by sending a secure link to the forms via an SMS text message. Two, they can be completed at your office on your client's own device by scanning a QR code. Or three, they can be completed at your office using a center-furnished tablet. So let's go ahead and go to the CenterPiece Scheduler and walk through these steps. First, I'm going to close the task pane right here so we have more viewable space on the scheduler. Notice that I currently have 3 appointments for the center. So let's say that I want to create a form request for this client, Lindsay Gray, who's coming in for a pregnancy test. To create the form request, all I need to do is click here on the ellipsis under the Mobile Forms column. The form request dialog will open. Next, I'll select the specific forms that I want Lindsay to fill out since she's coming in for a pregnancy test. For this example, we'll assume that Lindsay is a new client. So I'm going to want to send her the contact information form, the case intake form, and the pregnancy test form. Next, I can select which consent forms I want her to read and sign. I'm going to select the Request for Services form and the HIPAA consent form. And again, I walked you through setting up these forms in the previous 2 videos, but if you need help with that, please go back and watch those 2 videos. And also remember that when you're selecting which intake and consent forms to include in the form request, you only need to send the forms that are relevant for the specific type of appointment that your client's coming in for. Okay, so with my intake and consent forms selected, all I need to do is click Save and Close, and that's it. The form request has been created and is queued for the client. Notice the status in the scheduler now says queued. Now let's say that after sending the form request, I actually remembered that I want to include another form. You can add or remove any forms on the form request up until it's been returned by the client. To do that, all you need to do is click on the status to edit the form request. So let's say that I also want her to fill out the health history form. I can click right here and then select the health history form. I'll click Save and Close, and now that health history form will be included with the other ones. Okay, so next, let's go ahead and talk about the second step of how the client receives and completes the forms using CenterPiece's mobile intake application. I'm going to show you all 3 ways, but let's first take a look at sending the client an SMS text message with a secure link to the forms so the forms can be completed before the client arrives at your center. To do that, let's create a second form request and send the forms via SMS text to this client right here who's also coming in for a pregnancy test. Because when you're sending the form request via SMS text, you don't actually need to queue the form request like we did last time. Instead, you can immediately send it directly to the client right from the scheduler. Okay, so let's walk through this real quick, and once more we're going to click on the ellipsis right here under the Mobile Forms column. Again, I'm going to send this client the contact information form, the case intake form, and the pregnancy test form. And I'll also ask that she reads and digitally signs the Request for Services form. Now, instead of clicking Save and Close like we did last time to queue the form request, I'm instead going to click Save. This keeps the form open, and once I click Save, notice that these tabs are now available. So I'll click on the Send Forms tab, and all I need to do is select my SMS template and then click Send Form Request. I'll confirm the send, and you can see that the form request was created and sent to my client, all in one easy step. I'll close out of this and notice that the status has been updated to sent. Okay, so just to differentiate, if you want the client to complete the forms before they arrive at your center, you need to send the forms via an SMS text message. When sending via SMS text, you don't need to create the form request and then queue it. Instead, you can create the form request and then immediately send it to the client. And it's really that easy. Now, one other quick note. If you do want to send your forms via text message, you also need to watch the Setting Up Your SMS Templates for Mobile Forms video in the Video Training Center under the Help tab in CenterPiece. This video will walk you through everything you need to know to get up and running with sending your form requests via SMS text. Okay, so we're going to take a look at the text message that is sent to the clients with the link to the mobile intake and consent forms, and we'll walk through those forms in just a second. But I first want to go back to this queued form request that we created earlier and show you the other two ways that the client can receive the forms. Now, please note, you do not need an SMS account to use mobile intake. The only time you need an account is if you intend to text intake forms to the client prior to their visit. The next two methods I'm going to discuss don't require an SMS text account because the forms will be completed when the client arrives at your center. So let's quickly go back to our process flow diagram and remember that the second way the client can receive and complete forms is for the receptionist at your center to scan a QR code using the camera of the client's phone to launch the mobile intake app. So let's walk through that example and say that this client, Lindsay Gray, who we've already queued the form request for, has arrived at our center for her appointment. As the receptionist, the first thing that I'll do is click here on the mobile intake menu that's conveniently located right here in the scheduler. Clicking on this will take me to the mobile intake inbox where I can manage all of my form requests. I'll locate the queued form request for Lindsay Gray and click to expand the row details. Next, I'd ask Lindsay for her phone with the camera open, and I'd simply point the camera at this QR code and then click on the link. So let's actually do that. I'm going to share out my phone to the screen, and then I'm going to go ahead and point the camera right at this QR code, and a link pops up. I'm going to click on the link, and the mobile intake app launches. At this point, I would hand the phone back to Lindsay, and she would first validate her identity by answering these two questions, and then she would begin filling out the forms. Using the QR code is also great for walk-in clients or if someone schedules a same-day ultrasound. You can quickly queue up the forms for the client and then scan the QR code, and they can digitally fill out the forms in the waiting room. Also note, if you don't want the client to hand over their phone, they can manually type in the 7-digit code into the mobile intake application on their phone. They would just need to open Safari and then navigate to https://cpintake.ekairos.com to launch the mobile intake application. And here's what that screen would look like. From here, they would type in that 7-digit code, and then they could verify their identity and then get started with the forms. Now, I'm not going to walk through that because we're going to do that in the next example. Okay, so now let's talk about the third way that the client can receive and complete the forms, and that is for the receptionist to launch the mobile intake app on a center-owned tablet and enter in that unique 7-digit code that we just talked about. So I'm going to again share out my device to the screen, and from here, as the receptionist, I would just enter in that 7-digit code. Then I would hand the tablet back to the client where they would validate their identity and then complete the digital forms in the waiting room. Okay, so just to review, if you want your clients to receive and complete the digital paperwork before they arrive at your center, you will create the form request and then immediately send it from the scheduler via SMS text like we did with our client, Sarah Dennison. Note that this does require an SMS text account. If, however, you prefer them to fill out the digital paperwork after they arrive, or if you have a walk-in client, or even if you have a situation where someone schedules a same-day ultrasound, you will create and queue the form request. And from there, you can have them complete the forms either on their own device using the QR code or the forms can be completed on a center furnished device by launching the mobile app and then entering in that 7-digit code. Those two options do not require an SMS text account. Okay, so now let's jump back to that form request that we created and sent via SMS text message, and let's take a look at the text message that was sent. To do that, I'll once again share out my phone, and here is the text message that was sent out. After the client clicks on the link, the mobile intake app will launch, and the client will be asked to verify their identity by entering in their birth date and their last name. So we actually require 2 additional forms of validation besides their phone number. Okay, so I'm going to quickly enter in the client's birth date and then the last name, and you can see the digital forms that we sent. So let's open this first one, the contact information form. Now for time purposes, I'm not going to enter all of the information in these forms, but I do want to enter in a few fields so you can see how they're added to the client file. So I'll scroll down a bit and let's enter in an email address. And next, we have this question that asks if it's okay to contact the client. Now notice that text is already selected, but you can also see that this question says that the client can select 1 or more options. So I'll go ahead and select 2 more options for this one, email and phone. I'll scroll down, and the next 3 questions on this form say to select 1 item. So I'll select female here, and if I try to select not applicable, notice that it will switch over and only let me select 1 item. I'll go ahead and answer this second one here, and then also notice that this form is built for touch. So for instance, here on the language spoken field, I can click English, and if I want to deselect it, I'll just click it again and it's deselected. Okay, so with this form filled out, I'll click Next, and you can see that there is now a green check mark next to the contact information form showing me that this form is complete, and I have an arrow showing me that the next form I need to fill out is the case intake information form. I'll click on that and begin answering a few questions on the form. I'll go ahead and scroll down to the bottom. I'll answer this last one here and click Next. And notice that I get a friendly error message here asking me to please scroll up and answer all required fields. And that's because when we set up this form, we made the income field required. So I'll scroll up, and you can see that the income field is in fact required. So I'll go ahead and answer that, and then scroll back down and click Next. Okay, so now the next form I need to fill out is the pregnancy test form. I'll click to open it, and again, for time purposes, I'm not going to fill out everything, but I do want to enter in the LMP right here, and I'll answer a few questions, and then I'll quickly scroll down to the bottom, and I'll answer this last one and click Next. Okay, so we've completed all of the intake forms, and the last thing we have here are the consent forms. I'll click here, and you can see that we only have 1 consent form, the request for services form. I'm going to click to open it and scroll down a bit, and you can see that the client is asked to read the form and then click I accept. Then they will type in their full name right here, and then the client will click that they understand that by entering in their name and clicking continue, they are electronically signing this document. So let's do that, and then we'll click Next. And with all of the forms now complete, I'll click Submit, and you can see that the client is given a message that they have checked in online. Okay, so now let's go back to CenterPiece and take a look at the status of this form request. Notice that instead of saying sent, it now says returned, showing us that the client has filled out the forms and returned them. Okay, so at this point in the process, we've completed our form request. We've walked through all 3 ways that the client can receive and complete the forms. We've also completed the forms and returned them to the center. The next step is to process the completed forms in CenterPiece. This step will allow you to open and review the forms that the client completed prior to saving them to the client's file. So we'll walk through that step in the next video. If you have any questions about creating or completing a form request, please click on the Help tab and then on the Mobile Intake Documentation under the Office Management section in the User Guide. And also remember to be sure and watch the Setting Up Your SMS Templates for Mobile Intake video if you are planning on having clients fill out their mobile intake forms before arriving at your center. You can find that video in the Video Training Center. And as always, please don't hesitate to reach out to us if you need any help. Thanks so much for your time.